A teacher of 40 years who has raised three children and an active participant in the lives of her seven grandchildren. Amy Pollack joins us this
Hmm.
morning and has observed and dealt with many different individuals, a potpourri who are depicted and, well, she hopes, immortalized in her books. It has been told in The Adventures of Jelly Bean. The further adventures of Jelly Bean are reminiscent of Judy Blume's and S.E. Hinton's books. That's actually a really good comp, by the way, guys, if you're a big fan of either The Outsiders or, any of that kind of work. There's a lot of stuff that really kind of plays that. Many middle grade boys and girls, as well as their parents, have found these stories compelling. She hopes others will too. And we're going to be asking the biggest question of all: why a retired teacher of 4 decades and a grandmother of seven took to publishing middle grade fiction after, well, basically working on this story for the better part of 6 decades. It is our pleasure to welcome the author of this wonderful book. Amy Pollack joins us this morning on the eve of Thanksgiving. Good to have you, Amy. Welcome.
Hi, good to be here. Very nice being here. Thank you for having me on.
And by the way,
And
I wanted to say
mhm,
really quickly, there's a lot of people in the veteran space who have children who I think this book is going to make a massive impact on, and I think that is a really
mhm,
cool thing. So let's just
yeah.
start with this adventure towards writing.
So what happened was, um, I'll try to cut to the chase. So when I was in fourth grade, my teacher, which was quite a number of years ago, let's say, all right, now I'm 72, and this was when I was 9 and 10. So you can do the math there. And when I go in to give presentations at the schools, I say, who here knows what procrastination is? Of course, many of them do. Oh, my mom says I do that because I go in to give presentations about my books in the schools. Um, like fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, sometimes third grade. I went into my little granddaughter's first grade class. The teacher said, you know what, just talk about becoming a writer. So back to when I was in fourth grade, because I digress, my teacher would call me to the front of the class and I would tell these stories off the top of my head about that's just one thing I'm good at is being a storyteller. And the kids liked it, and it was about this little forthright fourth grader named Jellybean, and she was mischievous. And all right, through the years, I was, in school, and then I was working and teaching, and in college, and then in graduate school, and then I had my own three kids, and or as my mother would have corrected me, rest in peace, my children. And now I have my seven grandchildren, and through the years, I would write other things in the journals for my schools and so forth, and this and that. And my mother-in-law, who was, again, rest in peace, like pretty critical, but she would always say to me, whatever happened to your children's stories? They were so good. So I said, you know what? She criticizes me about everything else, and she was really a good person, extremely helpful. But as I said, quite lacking a filter and critical about things. So I knew this was a meaningful compliment coming from her. All right. Along came, I just talked about that in my book launch, and some people got a laugh, especially the ones that knew her. Because she did live till age 94. Well, anyway, so along came COVID when we were, stuck at home when my daughter had little ones, babies. And what? You're not allowed to come here to help me? I said, it's not permissible right now. So I had these 4 months of being home where I could either clean out my closets or get back to my jelly bean books and continue them and send them off to publishers. I got a couple of rejections naturally. And then along came Austin Macaulay. That was the name of my first publisher. And they liked my books. And first I thought, it was like a friend of mine playing a trick on me or something. But they were serious. I called. They loved my books. And my jelly bean had become not just a mischievous little girl, but as my reviewers said, many of them, she's a real role model. And I was like, wow, that's a really good compliment because I hadn't set out to to make her that way. But she became that way because, I don't know, my characters take on a life of their own. And then, lo and behold, it became a really popular book among, as you were saying, among parents, grandparents, and the children, because my book is very real. Like, she has a friend, her best friend, Jelly Bean, that is, named Brittany. I don't want to give too many, spoiler alerts. And the parents don't approve of her, which happens in many, 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 many households. And they have their reasons, but she has her reasons, Jelly Bean, that is, about loving this little girl who's like a loyal, wonderful friend. And the crux comes my book one, when she says to her parents, mostly her mom, and these are based on real life characters, which of course are the best characters. She says, "You don't like her just because she's poor." Whoa. So I don't want to make her mother evil. And, this little girl, again, without wanting to give away too much, and these situations happen where her mom's a single parent and ends up having to work tough hours and leave her little daughter alone a lot. So she didn't, and most of the kids in the class don't want their children to be there when there's no adult in the house. And that's one situation. And you'll see how poor Jelly Bean works that one out.
The other thing is, I wanted to bring this up because you actually opened the door to this, is that your characters do what they want to. And one of the things, the other thing I kept thinking of on the comps as I read this was I kept thinking about from the mixed up files of Miss Basil Frankweiler, and I kept thinking about some of the dynamics in the simplest of stories like the Encyclopedia Brown series, where at some point the characters become who they want to become, and just like any family that is bustling and has a lot of action going around, you can't stop people from speaking up, right? They're going to interrupt. Families, when you write about suburban families, when you write about that world, it's like the chaos of the house. If you stop it from getting into the book, if you try to force the book into doing what you want it to do as opposed to what they want to do, you end up killing the realism of what's going on, right?
Yes, exactly. You ruin the story because it's not real, and I could not make that happen. Jelly Bean has to go her own way, and that's a really interesting point. Now, if a parent or a caretaker person is reading this to the little girl or boy, it can open up discussions on certain issues that are kind of tough to talk about. I know when raising my own children, it was pretty tough. They don't want to talk about certain things, and it's hard to make them. But if it happens in something you're reading to them or that they're reading, it can be a much easier entree into discussing something that you believe or know is important.
I'll tell you, Amy.
Friendship.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Amy. So what I was thinking about with this book for my daughter. So my daughter Amy is adopted. She just turned 7, and she does not look like us or anyone else in our family. And it's been I've heard along. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I've heard a lot of people say that it's right when they turn 7 is when, for whatever reason, that's that number where things start changing and they're asking more questions. And she is saying things. She's saying some very difficult things, which I will say here. It's, she's saying, when am I going to turn white? And she's kind of trying to scratch at her skin. I only bring that up, and that's tough. That's obviously very tough. But it's stories like Jelly Bean that give me hope. You know what I mean? That's like, if I read this kind of story to her, which I will do, by the way, I think it's almost like organically just letting people see organically that there's different situations, there's different scenarios out there. And then we don't really have to fully talk about it. It's just like acknowledging that that everybody has a different path and everybody kind of looks different and families look different. And once we acknowledge it, we feel better. So so how much of this is, with, I guess you've seen so much as a teacher for 40 years, of course, as well. How much of just like organically of you pouring into all the different scenarios you've seen in your kids just kind of falls in there. Jelly Bean has her own way, but it's almost like everything you've seen, Jelly Bean kind of combines to be all of that, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes, exactly. Because I didn't know if you wanted me to go there,
Yes,
but
for sure.
her friend Brittany, okay, she is of mixed race.
Hmm.
And she feels like if I were to write a separate book, which I've thought about from Brittany's point of view, she doesn't feel comfortable in the situation where she is, where most everybody in her school, or if she goes over to someone's house, is white. And Jellybean doesn't understand, how could she really understand it? And she tries explaining it to her. She said, "How come, you don't get this?" And Jellybean is such a good person, I have to make her that way because that's how she is. She said, "Well, I don't see any difference in you." And then her friend Brittany said, "Well, I do. I feel it. Some of the kids don't want to be friends with me." And that's, like you said, that's a real issue. However, it gets resolved one way or the next,
Hmm.
and you'll have to see, what happens to her. Because not easy. I mean, a lot of situations where someone feels like an outsider aren't so easy, and they get resolved
Yeah.
in a variety of ways.
I've had a it's been interesting for me because when we say kids don't see color, it's not that they don't see it. They actually do see it, but they
Hmm.
don't, at least this is my experience with my daughter and what we've seen. It's with the other kids that, our friends' kids or whatever, kids at school. It's like, yeah, they see that she's a different color, but they don't acknowledge that there's a difference or necessarily something wrong with it until it's like some age.
Exactly.
It's like the magic age where something changes, and now we realize because they have parents in their ears and whatever it is, then they all of a sudden say like, oh, they go from acknowledging that you look different to something changes at some point, and then it's like, oh, the different becomes sort of a negative. And I don't know, at least with me and my family,
Yeah,
we're just
you're
trying to
right.
make everything so organically. If somebody says something to her, I'm like, so what? That person's stupid. Like, I mean, I've literally just dumb it down that much and be like, all right, well, they're dumb. We just want to hang
Hmm.
out with them. Move on. You know what I mean? But with your
No,
teaching
yes.
experience put in your books, how much do you think we give somebody that power, or just, is it okay to tell your kid just walk away from that person, or versus like standing up for
Oh,
yourself?
gosh.
How do you balance that?
Hmm. That is certainly a tough one. And
Yeah.
okay, the way my books feel, and my PR person was telling me this, I said, one of the questions I had to answer for one of the interviews was, what's the theme of your book or some, and I said, well, I can't really think of a theme. And then my PR person, he said to me, she, what she is saying to kids, my main character, is you have to think for yourself, which is really, really hard. I mean, there's so much peer pressure. And like you're saying, around that age, for me, it was like fourth grade, things come into focus. All of a sudden, you're like, I don't really like that situation. Whereas you sort of accepted things up till that point because in most families, you just kind of don't know any different, good, bad, or indifferent, whatever your family situation is. And things like that, let's say realizing you're different in some way or another, becomes all of a sudden an issue. Like, oh, what do I do about this? Or not. Or like you say, just learn to walk away, which her friend Brittany is really good at answering back kids or teachers. And that's part of the reason why Jellybean likes her so much. And she just became this character that was, I think, a really important thing for kids to acknowledge,
Hmm.
that you can stick up for yourself even when it can be pretty difficult if you feel like you're different from everybody else in one way or another.
By the way, I was so excited about having you on the show because my mother was a
Hmm.
teacher of 50 years. Still with us, still active of mind. And I wanted to kind of share this with people. So on Monday, Brittany was back in school. At recess, she had a big crowd around her, and everyone was asking her a lot of questions. How come you didn't come at the beginning of the year, asked Riley. I don't know. I didn't feel like it, I guess, said Brittany. Everybody laughed. Really, said Kylie in her little voice. No, not really, said Brittany. I was living with my dad, she explained. Oh, said a lot of the kids. My parents are divorced too, said Caitlin, a shy girl whom Jelly Bean had never talked to. Yeah, but it wasn't just that, said Brittany. There was more to it. I don't feel really like explaining it right now. Leave her alone, you guys, said Shelby. Everyone listened to her, so most of the girls smiled at Brittany like they weren't exactly sure what to do or where to go. And I love these kind of moments, Lindsay, because what it's basically doing is, my mom always said, in school, there are bullies, there are victims, and there are heroes. And what she meant by that was there are people who are willing to speak their mind and stand up for themselves. And in this really kind of great moment, when Shelby says, leave her alone, you guys, everyone listened to her. And that we have a choice, even as kids, and I felt throughout the entire book, to empower children to stand up for what they feel is right in significant moments and understand that the consequences sometimes can be incredibly positive. That was something that kept coming up for me in the book. I don't know if you felt that was, what you were up to there, but there are so many moments of these little kind of tiny moral choices that pop up where you show rather than tell. You don't lecture people. You let the action speak for itself, right?
I so agree. If I'm reading a book, and, I'm in a book club, I'm just a big, huge, eclectic reader, and I don't want to be banged over the head with what they're trying to tell you. I'd rather have it happen, as you were saying, organically. Like and it is what happens in a lot of groups, and with raising my 3 kids, and I could see various things like that happen. And even there's another point where I'm sure you read this if you read my books, but her oldest brother has dropped out of high school, which the parents are very unhappy about, naturally, and he goes to join the Marines, and the teacher asks Jelly Bean to talk about that in school. We always had current events and such like. And one of the boys in the class yells out, "Oh, is he going to get killed there?" And everyone's like, "Oh my God, how can you say that?" And this is what happens, with a fraught topic like that. And then Jelly Bean says, "You guys stop." I'm blanking out on what his name was. He's just saying what everybody's thinking, but he said it. So don't, do that to him. Be that way towards him.
Yeah.
Which is, kind of interesting.
It landed.
But I had to have her say.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, I was going to say, with it, it was interesting to me too. First of all, I love that you use the word organic, because that is the saving grace in our household over here, kind of mentality. But it's interesting too that with all these children, and I don't even know what the thought process is behind it, but I guess that's my question. It's interesting that it's, quote unquote normal names like Brittany, Caitlin, Shelby, but then Jelly Bean. That Jelly Bean is the only name that's not a quote unquote real name. And I don't know why that was so interesting to me, but it was really interesting to me. And what is the thought process, if any, behind that?
It just was always, it's really her nickname. Her real name's Jillian Beth, if you read parts of
right,
it.
But I think it's funny that you...
Nicknames, continued in. Yeah, it's one of those nicknames that stuck. But if I do, I'm planning to continue it on, because everybody asks me if is she going to grow up. Well, yeah, she is going to have to grow up, but then I suppose, well, not my book 4, because I'm in the middle of that, where one boy gets bullied, and you can read about the reasons, because bullying is, like, as you were touching on, is such a big issue, in schools today, and on playgrounds and so forth. And she, sticks up for him, which is pretty tough, because, a lot of bad things can happen to a kid who tends to get bullied, as we, hear a lot about on the news. But in any event, her nickname just kind of stuck, and I'll see if she goes back to what her real name is in future books. I don't know. I sort of think about it sometimes.
There is by the way, guys, for those of you who haven't got a chance to read this, if you have middle school children or children who at an early age take a deep interest in reading, this is a terrific series of books, the beginning of a terrific series of books that will actually allow you some real kind of time here. We do have this is interesting, by the way. You said Jelly Bean, Lindsay, I'm going to correct you. There is one other interesting name in here that I think a lot of our listeners will actually really dig. You're talking to truckers, a lot of men and women who make their living over the road. Would you please tell them the name of the dog, Amy?
Oh, I don't know how I arrived at that, but his name has always been Roger Over. And I don't know how it came about. I can't even explain some of my thought processes, but it just, I don't know, it just kind of fit. But that's funny how it fits in with a lot of your listeners. And my husband said he's a huge dog lover, and I always go, I don't know, her dog, maybe is going to die. And he said, don't you dare make that happen.
You have one job. You can control it. Don't kill Roger Over.
Don't forget.
By the way, shout out to Bunny. Y'all's dog back at home, by the way. And I also am curious, after being a teacher for 40 years and teaching kids how to, when you're trying to teach how to write correctly or get the facts right, and then becoming an author. I'm so curious the transition to go from teaching when we're like, this is how you do it. And then you become an author, just writing all around with like no rules. You just get to say and do and imagine and do whatever you want. Did you have to like reprogram your brain to make that switch? Or was it like the most freeing thing ever? Yeah.
No, a little bit. But don't forget, I also taught, oh my God, over the years, so many grade levels and other subjects as well, which didn't thrill me as much. But especially when I taught writing on the college level, it did teach me a lot about structure and things that I'm not ordinarily so good at, outlining, which I had to teach about and which I'm horrible at, but I, kind of have to do it, even if, I would tell them, you have to make your outlines flexible. I guess the hardest thing was when in my grading process, oh boy, when I had it, how come I didn't get an A? Well, if you read in my teacher's manual and what my supervisor would say is that to get an A, your writing has to be elegant. I'm like, oh boy, that's tough to define. It's easier said than done, but obviously did my best. And from all my reading, I can sort of see what flies. And like I tell them, and when I go to speak in the schools, most importantly, your writing has to move like spilt blood. It can't, nobody, especially now with, kids on their devices all the time, including my grandchildren, you can't slow it down to have a lot of, descriptors, descriptions of places and overdo it with that kind of thing. You kind of just have to move. And, I try to do that.
By the way, we're out of time here on this eve of Thanksgiving. It's the third book, The Adventures of Jelly Bean series. More changes coming for those of you who know the series, by the way. For those of you who haven't started it, it's a great place to start if, in fact, you have kids who have a deep level of reading and actually want to spend some quality time with them. I want everybody to go to theadventuresofjellybean.com. There's some, by the way, Amy is not only a terrific writer. There's a really fun technique that she uses in her books, which is very, very old school, where the chapters get summarized at the top, in which, which I really love. It's the old 19th century placard kind of approach to stuff, and yet deals with some really great and really important issues throughout the series. Anorexia comes up, divorce comes up, death is actually a part of the equation.
But it all comes up organically, and that's what we're trying to teach. This is a very real and a great thing for truckers. Amy, our truckers are always trying to think of things they can pick up along the way to bring home to their kids, whether they actually get it on the road or not. But I think this is a perfect one. A lot of drivers deal with the struggles of being gone and away from their kids. That's a whole dynamic as well.
Right.
So
this book
and everyone.
travel.
Yeah, exactly. So we are thankful for Jelly Bean and for you, Amy, this Thanksgiving season. And best of you and to you and your family and Bunny on Thanksgiving
you
tomorrow.
too. And have a great holiday. Yeah, to all. And it's amypollack.com if you want to go on my
amypollack.com.
website.
amypollack.com. That's the one I left out. Thank you, Amy. Happy holidays and happy beginning of this crazy season. Thank you so much.